On the afternoon of February the 14th, 1945, Charles Walton, a 74-year-old farm labourer, is brutally attacked and murdered, pinned to the ground with his own pitchfork, his throat slashed. The work of a deranged escape prisoner, a local farmer with an axe to grind, or a ritualistic killing. I'm Kat Park. Join me with your favourite tipple as we unfold the details of this grisly and brutal case of Charles Walton Unsolved in the Murder and Wine Club. The year is 1945. The date, 14th of February. The location, Lower Quinton, Warwickshire. World War II has intensified with a devastating attack on Dresden in Germany, killing more than 30,000 people. The Evening Standard costs 1 penny and a pint of beer 5 pence. Charles Walton is a widower who has lived in Lower Quinton all of his life, renting the same cottage since World War I. Although he suffers from rheumatoid arthritis and uses a walking stick, Charles, at 74 years of age, is still working the land. For the past 9 months, he's been employed at the Firs, a farm occupied and run by local farmer Alfred Potter. It's 8:30 a.m. on Valentine's Day. Charles leaves his home, 15 Lower Quinton, the home he shares with his 33-year-old adopted daughter Edith. He sets off on his mile walk to work, and with him he takes his lunch, a piece of fruit cake, and his tools, a pitchfork and a slash hook, a double-edged pruning tool with a sharpened straight edge on one side and a concave cutting edge on the other. Notably, he's left his wallet behind. It's a bright but bitterly cold morning as Charles walks through Lower Quinton churchyard. He's on his way to a field known locally as Hill Ground on the slopes of Meon Hill. 2 elderly people see him passing through the churchyard at approximately 9 a.m. This is the last time Charles Walton is seen alive. It's 6 p.m. Edith, who works as a printer's assembler at the Royal Society of Arts in Lower Quinton, arrives home. She is normally greeted by Charles, but tonight the cottage is empty and lies in eerie darkness. Charles is nowhere to be found. The dinner she has left out earlier for him remains untouched. Instinctively, she knows something is wrong. Charles is a creature of habit, a known loner, and is always home by 4 p.m. at the latest. A worried Edith calls on their neighbour Harry Beasley of 16 Lower Quinton, explaining that Charles is nowhere to be found. They search the nearby fields but find no sign of him. The concerned pair hurriedly make their way to the Firs and alert Alfred Potter, Charles's employer, that he has not returned home. It's now 6:15 p.m. Harry and Edith arrive at the farm. Potter claims that he last saw Charles slashing hedges earlier in Hillground Field. It is pitch black. The group grab their torches and immediately start to walk towards Hillground. As they walk, Potter informs the pair that he came to the field to cut some hay at noon and saw Charles at work. The search party increase their steps as they approach the hedgerows where Potter has allegedly last seen Charles. Edith, Harry and Potter begin to walk along the hedges, shining their flashlights frantically as they go, calling for Charles. It does not take long to find him. in an isolated corner of hill ground, just a quarter of a mile from the nearest road, Charles is found lying on his back. A slash hook is embedded in his throat. A pitchfork pins his body to the floor. The handle of the pitchfork has been wedged under the hedge. Charles's face and head are splattered in blood. It's 6:30 p.m. and Harry Peachy, a local, is walking on the other side of the hedge and hears Edith's blood-curdling scream. Rushing over, Peachy encounters Potter standing over Charles's lifeless body, and Harry Beasley trying to comfort a now deeply distressed and inconsolable Edith. Potter takes charge, ordering Peachy to fetch the police immediately. Beasley thinks he should take Edith home, leaving Potter alone in the dark with Charles's body. PC Lomasny is the first officer to arrive on the scene at 7:05 p.m. and is acutely aware that Potter is acting strangely. He is surprised when Potter makes an excuse that he's cold and tries to leave before reinforcements arrive. Lomasny finds it incomprehensible Potter wishes to leave, especially as Charles is his employee and has been found murdered on his land. Potter disappears just as Stratford CID turn up, and by 11:30 p.m, CID officers are combing the scene. Professor Webster, pathologist for the West Midlands Forensic Science Labs, has just arrived. The investigation into the brutal murder of Charles Walton is now underway. The post-mortem reveals Charles died from shock due to grave injuries to his neck and chest. The time of death occurred between 1 and 2 p.m. on the 14th of February. He had been hit over the head with his walking stick, presumably to disarm him. Charles's walking stick was discovered 3.5 yards away from his lifeless body, covered in his blood and hair. Charles's trachea had been cut deep, the attack so severe that he is nearly decapitated. There is bruising to his chest, with several rib bones broken. Defence wounds are evident too. A cut to his left hand, bruises to the back of his right hand. Charles had tried in vain to protect himself from his attacker. Professor Webster concludes 2 weapons have been used, a stabbing weapon and a cutting weapon, which he presumes are the pitchfork and slash hook. It's further stated that the cutting weapon has been wielded at least 3 times with great violence. This is a savage and terrifying attack that would have taken a man or woman of quite some strength to have killed Walton alone. Charles's horrific and gruesome murder has sent shockwaves around the tight-knit community of Lower Quinton. Police are concerned a madman is on the loose, and the fear amongst the villagers is growing. Early on in the investigation, Stratford-upon-Avon police decide to ask Scotland Yard to assist them with this case. The Chief Constable of Warwickshire pens a message the very next day, saying, "The murder was either committed by a madman or one of the Italian prisoners who are in a camp nearby." Robert Fabian, Scotland Yard's prolific detective, and his partner Detective Sergeant Albert Webb are assigned to the case and join Stratford CID on the 16th of February. They start to investigate all avenues. No one is left out of the picture, and everyone becomes a suspect. Fabian sets up an incident room at Stratford-upon-Avon's police headquarters. An aircraft from nearby RAF Leamington is flown over the murder site, taking detailed photos of hill ground and the surrounding area. The spot where Charles Walton's body was found is marked on a sketch map based on RAF aerial photographs of the area by a Red Cross. Police start their inquiries by looking into Charles's life and affairs, and find the consensus that he is an inoffensive man, but one who speaks his mind when needs must. He is not disliked, but is a person who doesn't like to socialise with his neighbours, preferring to wander the countryside on his own. Statements are taken from over 500 residents of Upper and Lower Quinton. Some in the village talk of old superstition and alleged involvement in local witchcraft and covens. Strange things seem to happen around Charles. Birds flock to his hand, and there are whispers he can tame a wild dog by his voice alone. As a young man, he's earned himself a reputation as a trainer of horses. However, most locals believe that Charles has the wisdom of age, and living a life of a rural man knows the old ways. Fabian and his team dismiss the witchcraft theory, preferring to deal with the evidence before them. When interviewing locals, the detectives are met with a wall of silence. Villagers of Upper and Lower Quinton do not take kindly to strangers, especially when those strangers are poking their noses into their private affairs. With no apparent motive for the murder, Fabian orders an investigation into Walton's financial affairs. In June 1930, Walton deposited £227 and 10 shillings into his Midland bank account. This is money Walton has inherited from his wife, approximately £12,000 in today's money. By 1939, the balance has dwindled to £11 and 11 shillings and 9pence. Charles had been making numerous withdrawals over those years, but never more than £10 at a time. It is soon established and confirmed by Alfred Potter that Walton had been working for him for the past 9 months, and usually worked about 4 days each week, weather permitting. Walton is paid 18p per hour. His wages normally are paid at the end of each fortnight, sometimes weekly. The last pay packet of £2 and 15 shillings was given to him on the 10th of February. Edith confirms that Walton pays her £1 per week housekeeping, and their rent is 3 shillings per week. He also receives 10 shillings a week old age pension. Police conclude there is more than enough money to live off. Charles has worked his entire life and was frugal with his lifestyle. But when he died, his total assets came to no more than £5. A question the police keep asking is, where has all the money gone? The more the police delve into Walton's finances, the more they lean towards robbery as a motive. Charles may have misled the people around him into thinking he had more money than he actually had. A local farm worker recalls a specific conversation back in 1943. A fellow labourer had lost a £1 note, and whilst discussing this, Charles announced that it was silly to carry that amount of money around, and was quick to add he wasn't short of £200 or £300. His family, including Edith, were also under the impression that Charles had a few £100s saved up, and are astonished to find he's been lying about it. Fabian and his team delve deeper into Charles's affairs, searching his home and belongings. They find no financial records to show where and who the money could have gone to. It is concluded that Walton is a secretive type, and the mystery surrounding his money is almost as great as the mystery surrounding his death. With no clear motive, the police take the view that the murder has been committed by either an Italian prisoner from the nearby prisoner of war camp or someone closer to home. The list of suspects begins to grow, starting with the people close to the murder scene. No one is left out of the picture. Everyone is a suspect. Every household within Upper and Lower Quinton are interviewed over several weeks. Back at Police HQ, Fabian has set up a large map on the wall of his office. This is where all suspects are marked with a pin, so their movements can be tracked on the day of the murder. Long Marston, some 2.5 miles from Lower Quinton, is the home to RAF Long Marston. It's also where over 1,000 Italian prisoners of war are being held. Prisoners are regularly seen around Lower and Upper Quinton. They are allowed to roam the surrounding area as they please. Detective Sergeant Saunders of Special Branch is fluent in Italian, and Fabian tasks him with interviewing the prisoners. An arduous task. Saunders discovers on the afternoon of the murders, prisoners had gone into Stratford-upon-Avon to see a play, and some had been to the cinema. The prison usually kept a schedule of work days and free days, but no individual records are kept of prisoners' movements. It is plausible one of the Italian collaborators could have come across Walton on their travels. There are many examples of Italian prisoners being seen in the villages by the locals, buying cigarettes or just walking along the road that day. But the individuals cannot be identified properly. Another line of inquiry also lies within Long Marston, this time with RAF personnel stationed there. One witness, another farm worker, saw a British officer and a civilian collecting something on Meon Hill at approximately 11 a.m. on the day of the murder. Detectives soon trace a lieutenant with the 23rd ITC, a sergeant and a lance corporal. The lieutenant was in charge of manoeuvres at Meon Hill on that particular day. The person seen collecting things was a lance corporal removing booby traps. It was quickly established that the soldiers left Meon Hill after 11 a.m. and then left the district at 2 p.m. However, the lance corporal reported seeing a youth ploughing a field at approximately 11 a.m. on Meon Hill, close to where Walton was murdered. He also reports seeing a man aged 60 to 70 years of age, 5'4", dressed in a dark suit and wearing a light-coloured cap. This man was also carrying a stick, walking along a fence towards Meon Hill Farm, half a mile south from where Charles was found dead. These new pieces of evidence led the police to a son of a local farmer who owns Meon Hill Farm. He tells them that on the 14th of February he has been working in a field that overlooks Upper Quinton from 10 a.m. until 6 p.m. The only person he sees is a man at about 3 p.m. The man stood by a hedge about 150 yards from where he was ploughing. The youth doesn't notice anything peculiar and can only describe him vaguely. He said that the man appeared to be looking towards Lower Quinton Church and was there for about half an hour. The man did not pass him at any time, so it is assumed that he came up from Upper Quinton. The police are unable to identify the man on the hill. Soon police track down the man initially thought to be Charles, walking by the hedgerow. A 64-year-old farm labourer is interviewed and tells them he visits Meon Hill almost every morning to see his cattle. On the day of the murder, the man indeed walked along the hedge as described by the lance corporal. He confirms that he was dressed as described, and had been carrying a walking stick. The 64-year-old farm labourer said he remembered seeing somebody ploughing in the field, but didn't recall seeing any soldiers. There is only one other person the police determine who had been working near where Charles Walton was murdered. His best friend, George Higgins, a 72-year-old odd job man who has been a lifelong friend of Charles Walton and with whom he had, for several years until the winter of 1944, worked with him. On the 14th of February, Charles's friend was working on a farm where he was employed as an odd job man. He started at about 8:30 a.m. He worked in the barn at the back of his employer's bakery until noon, when he then went into the bakehouse to have his lunch. He later left the bakehouse at around 12:30 p.m. and returned to the barn where he worked until about 4 p.m. The police noted that the field adjoining the farm, which the man would no doubt have been in from time to time, was no more than 300 yards from the field that Charles Walton was found dead in, and that he could have quite easily reached that field from the adjoining field beside the bakehouse, unseen. As far as an opportunity was concerned, Charles's best friend could have quite easily committed the murder and then returned to his work without his absence being noted. However, George is a frail old man of 72 years of age, small in stature and partially crippled. It is also further reported that there is no evidence other than he was always on the friendliest of terms with Charles Walton, and that it would be difficult to imagine that he could have committed a crime of such savagery. With numerous lines of inquiries ongoing, the police are still no closer to catching the killer as leads turn cold and suspects are eliminated from the investigation. But this is soon to change. The murder of Charles Walton is baffling Fabian and his team. 4,000 statements have been taken. Hundreds of hours of manpower have been put into the investigation. Suspects have been interrogated and ruled out. But one man remains the prime suspect: Alfred Potter, Charles Walton's employer. Alfred Potter is a married 40-year-old farmer who has managed the Firs, a local farm, for the past 5 years on behalf of L.L. Potts & Co., a company owned by his father. Potter's behaviour has been odd ever since discovering the body of his employee. He has been interviewed on several occasions by different detectives, and each time his story is slightly different, sometimes with a different slant, or the chronological order of his whereabouts and what he did is skewed. His wife's behaviour is also causing detectives concern. Potter is first interviewed at 11 p.m. on the night of the murder by Detective Inspector Toombs. It is established that Walton has been employed for the last 9 months to cut back the hedges, but only working when the weather permits due to his arthritis. Hill Ground is the last field needing attention. Upon being asked about his movements that day, Potter states that he had been in the College Arms, a local pub with another farmer, Joseph Stanley, from Whitecross Farm. Both men had stayed in the pub until noon. Potter had then gone straight into the small field adjoining Hill Ground and saw Walton working approximately 500 to 600 yards away. PC Lomasny, the first officer on the scene, tells his superiors that something is not sitting well with him regarding Potter. When he arrived at Hill Ground at 7:05 p.m, Potter seemed to be more worried than one would expect him to be. As Lomasny has in the past been on friendly terms with the Potters, he is asked to stay close to the couple to see if they reveal anything. Potter's second interview takes place a few days later, this time with Detective Sergeant Webb, who is part of Fabian's Scotland Yard team. It is intimated by Potter during this interview that Charles has been a little dishonest about the hours worked. He believes he has paid Charles for more hours than he has worked. Potter retells Webb on the day of the murder he left the College Arms pub and walked to the Cackley's field to see his sheep and feed his calves. It was 12:20 p.m. when Potter allegedly sees Walton. He is positively sure it is Charles, as he's working where he should be on the hedges on hill ground. He also mentions that Walton is just wearing his shirt with no jacket. Webb gleans out of the interview that Potter did not visit Charles, as there was a calf in a ditch that needed his attention. Potter arrived at home at 12:40 p.m. and then went out to attend to the calf. Potter's account differs slightly here. He had originally told Edith and Harry Beasley that he'd come to the field to cut some hay, contradicting the information he'd given in his statements. Police start to verify Potter's statements and learn that the calf mentioned in his second statement was found on the previous day. A calf had been found drowned in Doomsday Ditch on the 13th of February. The carcass had not been removed from the furze until 3:30 p.m. on the 14th of February, almost 3 hours after Potter had claimed to have attended to it. The police take statements from employees and 5 other witnesses, who all refer to finding the dead cow, the arrangements made for the collection, and its subsequent removal. On the back of Potter's statement, Fabian makes inquiries into Potter's financial situation, specifically looking for any debts against Potter or the companies owned by his father. It is confirmed there are no debts. Fabian also makes inquiries at the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries. A test wage investigation was made on the 12th of January 1945 at Furze Farm. The leading inspector for the ministry is reluctant to reveal any information about the investigation without authority from his head office. Potter's suggestion that he had paid Walton for more hours than he should have done was disproved by an examination of sums and wages for L. Potter and Company, and those actually paid to Walton. It was later proven that Potter was claiming more than needed to pay his employee and pocketing the difference. On the back of Walton, he had a nice little side hustle going. Police also take statements from 2 former employees of Potter's, William George Died and George Purnell. Both men confirmed from time to time Potter had experienced difficulties in paying them. Meanwhile, police want to substantiate Potter's claim of seeing the victim. Charles Walton's clothes are collected from the West Midlands Forensic Science Lab, and it is found that his shirt sleeves have been cut away from above the elbows, and that the woolen cardigan worn by him over his shirt at the time of his death had long sleeves. It is therefore impossible for Potter to have seen him working in just his shirt sleeves. It is further noted that Charles had been wearing his jacket when he was attacked, as it had a cut in the shoulder caused by the slash hook, and his clothes were saturated with blood. Police conclude that even if Charles had been working in his shirt at 12:20 p.m, it was unlikely he would have suddenly decided to put on his jacket, unless he had made up his mind to finish work for the day. Added to this, the 14th of February was bitterly cold. Charles, who had crippling arthritis, which was affected by cold weather, wouldn't have taken his cardigan and jacket off. P.C. Lomasny's visit to the Furze on the 20th of February stirs up more suspicion, as he casually mentions to Potter and his wife the police are hoping to take fingerprints from the murder weapons. Upon hearing this, Potter announces that he touched the handles of the slash hook and possibly the pitchfork when he came across the body. He claims he had already mentioned this to the police. P.C. Lomasny notes that Mrs. Potter becomes upset at the revelation, as Potter goes to great lengths to explain why his fingerprints may be on the weapon. Potter claims he touched the weapon based on Harry Beasley saying, "You'd better have a look to make sure he's gone." Police recall when Harry Beasley was being interviewed on the 14th of February, he was confident that Potter had realised Walton was dead from the moment he saw Walton's body. Beasley, in a later interview, strongly refuted any question that he'd asked Potter to make sure Walton was dead, as it was obvious that he was. He also stated that Potter had not touched the weapons in his presence. More discrepancies come to light. Potter's statement further changes in his third statement on the 23rd of February, which contradicts his statement regarding the car. This time, he tells Fabian that after visiting Cackley's field, he had come straight home, read the paper for 5 minutes, and then went outside to help one of his workers, Charles Happy Bachelor, to pulp mangolds for a few minutes. Both men had looked at the church clock and noticed it was 1 p.m. Potter's story is further corroborated by his wife, who has said Potter had arrived home soon after 12:30 p.m, read, asked how long dinner would be, then popped outside to help Bachelor. He returned to the house at 1:05 p.m. Bachelor also confirmed, in great detail, that Potter had helped him around at 12:40 p.m. Police at the time thought it was very curious that the farmer, having such a witness, did not mention the fact of the mangold pulping in his earlier statements. The report added that the farmer might have bided his time to ensure Bachelor was willing to vouch for his movements during the time of the murder. When interviewed, Mrs. Potter told detectives she had seen her husband at 11 a.m. on the morning of the murder. He had come into the house to fetch some equipment to castrate some calves and was only in the house a few minutes before leaving for Whitecross Farm. Detectives find it remarkable that whilst his wife is exact about the timings of her husband's coming and goings around lunchtime, she cannot recall what they had for lunch or his movements at any other time of the day. Another discrepancy of Potter's account is his ever-changing story of seeing Walton working in the distance. Stating in his first interview he saw Walton at 12:10, later changing it to 12:15. Once again, Potter's mind serves him wrong, changing the time to 12:20. Potter's final account reveals he saw someone stationary at 12:30 p.m. The PC who relieved PC Lomasny on the night of the murder and stood guard over the scene reported that Potter returned to Hill Ground at first light on the 15th of February. The police constable had warned Potter away from the scene. The revelation brings Fabian and Webb back from London to interview Potter again, questioning why he had not told them about returning to the murder scene. A little after the murder, Happy Bachelor and one other employee resign. Fabian comments that perhaps both employees realised the nature of the man they worked for. Fabian also wondered if Bachelor had compromised himself by saying he had seen Potter at 12:40 p.m. The police request Potter's clothing and submit them to the West Midlands Forensic Science Lab. 2 marks are found on the front of his trousers. Professor Webb believes them to be bloodstains and reports that they have been cleaned too thoroughly for a positive analysis of human blood. Mrs. Potter is questioned about the trousers and is confident her husband has never washed them. Every effort is made to check the farmer's movements before, during and after the murder, other than his wife, who said that he had returned to the farmhouse at some time after 12:30. Nobody can say that they had seen him from about noon until 12:40 p.m, when Happy Bachelor said he had seen him come into the mixing house and had helped him to pulp some mangold. The police report noted, however, that the fact remained that whatever the farmer did between 12 and 1 p.m, he would have had ample time to have committed the murder. By his own admission, he was in the adjoining field at 12:20 p.m. Fabian concludes that Potter is undoubtedly lying about his actions. The reason for his lies for the present are truly a matter of conjecture. Alfred Potter remains the prime suspect in Charles's murder, but Fabian and his team cannot find enough credible evidence to convict him. The shocking truth to this case is there are so many people within the vicinity of the murder scene, but disturbingly, not one person heard or saw anything. No one heard Charles's cry as the attacker pounded and stabbed his body. No one will admit to seeing anyone walking to and from the scene. As part of the ongoing investigation, with the hope of discovering that one piece of evidence will move the case forward, the police interview residents of the dwellings close to where Charles has been murdered. The nearest dwelling to where Charles's body was found is a cottage 300 yards away. Its occupants are a 33-year-old woman and her 59-year-old lodger. The woman has been working as a housekeeper in Upper Quinton, and on the day of the murder had been working there until 12:15 p.m. She had then called in on her aunt in Upper Quinton and returned to the cottage to prepare lunch for herself and her lodger. Her lodger is employed at the printing works where Edith, Charles's daughter, works. He returned to the cottage at 1:08 p.m. and stayed with his landlady until 2 p.m. Both left the house together. Neither saw anyone pass the cottage or the fields nearby and heard nothing unusual whilst they were in the cottage. Another dwelling that had a clear view of the field where Charles was murdered was a caravan occupied by a flight lieutenant and his wife. Just before he left to go on duty at Long Marston's aerodrome, the flight lieutenant sees Charles pass his caravan at about 8:30 a.m. He is away all day and returns at 5:30 p.m. His wife remained in the van all day and tells detectives that she did not see anyone in the field at any time after seeing Charles walk past. His wife tells the police their baby had been particularly unsettled that day and she'd been consumed with their child. Someone possibly could have passed the van without her knowing. She couldn't be sure. Potter, interestingly, had said he'd gone to the field adjacent to where Charles was murdered at 12:20 p.m, but he was not seen by the wife, even though he would have had to have passed quite close to the van. Within a few months, the inquiry starts to lose momentum, and despite using the latest police and scientific methods of its time, without a motive or any key witnesses, the case goes cold. There is, however, one more line of inquiry that the police can take, but it is one that they are unwilling to publicly investigate. When Charles was found, it was noted that his trousers and shirt were undone, and it was considered that they might have been undone by his murderer looking for a money belt, as it was thought he had money. The police report noted that if robbery was the motive, the murderer was likely to have been a person with local knowledge. There was also another, more sinister explanation. Rumours started to circulate that when Charles's body was discovered, a cross had been engraved on his chest. Walton was considered by some locals to have connections with local superstitions, folklore, and the supernatural. Some believed he was a witch whose powers were feared by some villagers. It was claimed he could cast the evil eye and kept natterjack toads as pets, and used them to destroy the crops and livestock of local farmers. Two examples cited were the failure of the 1944 harvest and the death of Potter's calf on the 13th of February. It was claimed that this alleged witchcraft had led him to be murdered in a ritualistic manner, which involved his blood soaking into the ground to replenish the soil's fertility. It It was said that throughout the investigation, strange things had happened, including apparitions, strange dogs being seen, and dogs and livestock being found dead. It was claimed that soon after Walton's murder, a black dog was found hanging from a tree close to the murder scene. Added to this conspiracy, similarities were drawn to the murder that took place in September 1875, only a few miles away from Upper and Lower Quinton, where a woman was murdered in the same way as Walton. Anne Tennant, aged 79, was stabbed to death, without warning, by a local farmhand, James Haywood, using a pitchfork. He stabbed her in the legs and head. Haywood claimed that Anne was a witch, and that there were other witches in the village, whom he intended to deal with in the same way. Although committed to trial for murder, he was found not guilty on the grounds of insanity and spent the rest of his life in Broadmoor Criminal Lunatics Asylum. 9 years after the murder of Walton, the Daily Mirror revisit the killing of Anne Tennant and alleged similarities between that event and Walton's murder. The investigative journalist reports that the police have found one other link between the two killings, but pledged not to reveal it. Despite the circumstantial evidence weighted against Potter, there is no physical evidence linking him to the crime, nor any witnesses. There is also no evidence that Potter is capable of such violence, nor that there was a quarrel between the two men. Add in a village that remains tight-lipped, the case goes cold. Reluctantly, Fabian and Webb return to London. It seems that Britain's most prolific detective has finally been beaten by Charles Walton's murder. It is a case that becomes a personal obsession for Spooner, part of the original police team, long after the world has lost interest and the files have begun to gather dust. He becomes a familiar face about the village, often arriving unexpectedly to spook the killer. He is convinced by the ritualistic angle, believing that the answer lies in Lower Quinton and that a local man must have been responsible. The DSI returns every year to climb Meon Hill and walks around the village, hoping to spot some overlooked clues missed during the initial investigation. The official inquest into Walton's death gives the cause of death as murder by person or persons unknown. Charles is buried in the churchyard at Lower Quinton, but years later, due to crowds of people descending onto Lower Quinton, a family member removes his headstone. Today, there is no trace of Charles Walton or the events of February the 14th, 1945. Due to the notoriety of the case, many amateur sleuths have visited Lower Quinton to see if they can crack the case that Fabian could not. Everyone who visits the village, even today, is met with the same wall of silence the police were met with all those years ago. Even the modern-day villagers want to keep the secret behind Charles' death under lock and key. Fabian many years later commented that Alfred Potter probably did commit the murder, and that the villagers knew the reasons behind the killing. Alfred Potter died in 1961, taking whatever secrets he had to the grave. One more strange occurrence happened in August 1960. The outhouses behind the cottage rented by Walton were being demolished. One workman discovered an old tin pocket watch. It was later identified as Walton's. Inside the watch, a piece of coloured glass was found. Walton never let this watch out of his possession. Villagers revealed that the glass found was witch glass, used to absorb or deflect evil thoughts aimed at its owner. Police revealed that during the early days of the investigation, they searched the same place and found nothing. It appears that the killer returned later to deposit the watch. Why had the murderer felt it necessary to take such a large risk in returning the watch when they could have easily have disposed of it by other means? The murder of Charles Walton remains open to this day and is considered to be Warwickshire Police's oldest ongoing investigation. I would love to know your thoughts on the mysterious case. This is the last episode of Charles Walton Unsolved. If you like our show, please give us a 5-star rating and review, and remember to tell your friends. Thank you so much for supporting the Murder and Wine Club podcast. We really do appreciate it. You can listen to all future episodes right now before anyone else by joining the Murder and Wine Club Access All Area membership. You'll not only get early episode access, but you'll also have access to our monthly psychic detective sessions with one of our resident psychic mediums, plus bonus episodes and behind-the-scene access. Head over to buymeacoffee.com/murderandwine and join today. The link is in the episode notes. Subscribe on Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Spotify, or whatever you are listening on right now.